Welcome to Face Off. We have a couple of new faces to face off today. Both have been on the show before in different capacities. We have Bradley Schrager, an attorney, and Chuck Muth, the executive director of Citizen Outreach. So I expect we'll have some good decision. Let's start with some breaking news. The Attorney General of the United States announced that he is withdrawing some of the memos that governed how the Justice Department was going to deal with marijuana in states that have legalized marijuana. He is saying that this is a return to what he calls the rule of law, and that directing the Justice Department to enforce the laws as they were enforced before, consistent with Justice Department priorities. So how that specifically impacts Nevada is still yet to be seen. We have legalized not only medical marijuana, but recently recreational marijuana. California's recreational marijuana has gone into effect, which is probably what prompted this, because a little state like Nevada probably didn't get on the radar, but a state like California did. So the question is, what impact is this going to have on marijuana, and was it the right thing for the Attorney General to do? Chuck, let's start with you.
It's a terrible decision, but I see a silver lining. Let's face it, I mean, General Sessions is a throwback to the drug war. He's a drug warrior. He always has been, and he always will be. I think the decision, what he's made, though, is going to unite people from both the right and the left, Democrats and Republicans, who may not even be pot-friendly, but are going to see this as a states' rights issue. And clearly, the citizens of the individual states have made this decision on their own, and I think that maybe this decision will now put a firecracker underneath Congress and get them to finally make the changes that they need at the federal level to allow the states to have the opportunity to do what they're doing.
You think?
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I think we don't know yet what the impact will be here in Nevada, because all that Attorney General Sessions has done is rescind the previous direction without some sort of guidance of what's going to happen next. We may be left with a situation in which the individual U.S. attorneys in each state are making differing decisions, and so it wouldn't even be useful on a seen from a federalism level. So I think Chuck is right that this may in fact underline this issue for not just pot activists, but for people across the political spectrum, to make this issue once and for all something that is clear and up to the states individually, which I think has been working so far for the last 5 years since Colorado and Washington began this experiment.
I think he's going to have a problem too, in that the President of the United States has already come out on record in favor of letting the states decide on medical marijuana. I don't know that he's gone as far as recreational, but certainly medical marijuana, which is impacted by this. So I think you got a problem here between the chief executive, President of the United States, and his Attorney General. And it's not like this isn't the first time that we've seen that. But I think it's going to cause the White House to probably step in and get a little bit more involved.
And we were finally getting to a point where we were, in some enlightened way, beginning to think of marijuana differently from heroin or cocaine or methamphetamine, and the decision by the Attorney General today, I think, as sort of Chuck points out, is a throwback that evinces an attitude about marijuana that is simply outdated, I think.
It is on the Schedule 1 list of controlled substances, which is the same as LSD and club drugs, things that allegedly have no medicinal value. Clearly that is not the case. And medical authorities are clear on that. But what are the realistic chances, though, that you think that under President Trump, under a Republican-controlled Congress, that we would actually see a move to say, okay, you know what, let's take it off, at the very least take it off the Schedule controlled substances and put it on Schedule 2, or let's just take it off Schedule 1 and be done with it?
Well, one of the reasons why I've always thought it would be difficult to have a national marijuana policy is that in doing that, you're asking 538 members of Congress with very different constituencies, some in states that would have no interest in recreational marijuana or medical marijuana, to vote in favor of that based on, I don't know, some sort of states' rights or some other argument that I don't think many people would understand or would go far enough to allow them to make those votes.
But they have made the policy, though. Those 535, I think, members. Did you say 38?
That's right. 538 is the electoral college.
Yeah.
The election year has started.
Yeah. But in any case, they have made policy now. And the policy they've made has said it's illegal. It's got no medicinal value,
Right.
and that's the policy that's done. I don't know. My question is it possible that they would be able to come to a similar consensus to take it off?
I think politically it's difficult because you're talking about constituencies in states like the South, and I think it would be hard to see all of those congresspeople and their senators voting in that direction. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think the problem is Republicans, because they have been traditionally the drug warriors.
Yeah.
So you're going to need to see, if the Democrats stay united on this, they don't need to bring all the Republicans over to make a change at the federal level. They just need to bring over some. And I think the other thing that's coming into play here, that there is a growing sense for criminal justice reform that even Republicans and conservatives are seeing, that we're putting people in jail, not because we're afraid of them that they're going to do us bodily harm, but for things that are really nonviolent, and they're only hurting themselves if they're hurting anybody at all. So I think that's going to come into play, and I think you're going to see maybe some Republicans who are now championing criminal justice reform on issues like this jump into this issue as well.
That's a good angle, I think. I also think that that the unity of Democrats on this issue may not be as solid as people, or at least the placing it as high on the priority list. Because going back to McGovern, it's been an issue that Democrats have traditionally thought dragged them too far to the sort of what could be called the permissive left. So it has never been a priority, regardless of the fact that legalized marijuana, I think, is, in polls that I've seen, highly popular. But it has not been a priority for federal officials.
If we could only get some sort of odor control going on, I think a lot of people would be more in favor of it, because I can't drive down the street now without smelling marijuana. But
it's true.
In any case, out in the great city of Henderson, where I live, the city council has decided in its wisdom to sell to the Raiders organization a parcel of land, 55 acres of land, for half the price that it was assessed at, on the theory that having a practice facility in the Raiders' offices will spur economic development in that area. Was this a good idea, or was this corporate welfare?
It is corporate welfare. There's really little way to say it, and it sort of follows on from the giveaways regarding the stadium. The hope of economic bonanza based upon public payments for a stadium or giving away real estate really at a cut rate price. Nevada has tremendous pressing needs in all directions, and we may disagree on what those needs are, but the fact that there are what could be accessed public monies being spent on this in a way, in the hope that there will be some recovery later, seems to me will probably be illusory, and it has been illusory in other cities and states who have gone overboard in order to attract professional sports teams. So, no, I would not have been in favor of this particular move.
Chuck, you're a Ravens fan, right?
No.
Not anymore?
No.
You're from Baltimore. How are you not a Ravens fan?
Oh, Ravens fan. I thought you said Raiders fan.
No.
No.
Sorry, I should have articulated that much better. I apologize.
I'm not an NFL fan at all right now. I'm part of that whole boycott movement. And I would agree that, that probably this practice facility is also, it's corporate welfare. It's kind of like what we've done with Tesla and what we try to do with the other car, Faraday Future. I do disagree, though. I was a supporter of the stadium, and the reason why is that the stadium was being funded with room taxes, paid for by tourists, and that room tax was established specifically for the purpose of promoting tourism, which is what the stadium would do, not just for the Raiders, but for all manner of other events that Las Vegas will enjoy. So I thought that it was a specific tax for a specific purpose, and the stadium fell within there. So I was supportive of the tax for the stadium. I think you're probably right about the practice facility. That doesn't fall into the same category. Let the Raiders build their own facility. They could have afforded the money. Why should the taxpayers
the whole stadium if they wanted to, right?
Probably. I don't think that they would have made the move here without the taxpayer, addition. But that was decided way above my pay grade, though.
All right, we got too much agreement. Maybe we'll find some disagreement here on this next one. Chuck, you've been a supporter of President Trump. He had a little Twitter exchange recently talking to the leader of North Korea, where he said North Korean leader Kim Jong-un just stated that the nuclear button is on his desk at all times. Will someone from his depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I, too, have a nuclear button, but it is a much bigger and more powerful one than his, and my button works. So is this I think we can agree it's somewhat like a playground taunt. But is it dangerous at all? Is he taunting this guy in North Korea, in this regime, into losing face, into doing something that maybe he wouldn't otherwise have done?
I don't think so. I think probably the exact opposites occurred, because another tweet that came out just before we went on to tape the show, where the North Koreans have suddenly reopened a dialogue with South Korea, using the old red phone that we used to have with the Soviet Union. And so now all of a sudden, and I guess they haven't used it in 2 years. Now all of a sudden the North wants to talk to the South. So I think maybe it's having the exact opposite effect of what people are so afraid of. Trump is Trump. People don't take what he says always at face value. A lot of it is said in jest and not seriously, and a lot of people take him literally that probably shouldn't. But I think probably in the long run, he's told North Korea, which is a serious, serious problem, if you're going to mess with us, you're going to bring destruction on yourself. He said that before, and so I don't see the taunt as being something that, okay, we're going to have nuclear annihilation tomorrow.
I don't believe we're going to have nuclear annihilation tomorrow, but I will say this, and you can say a lot about the president's use of social media. It is a new phenomenon for a president of the United States to seek a profile in which he appears sophomoric and reckless in the realm of nuclear conflict. That is, if it's a ploy, it is a reckless one. The generation before mine grew up in a world in which nuclear conflict was both terrifying and potentially imminent. By the time I came of age in the 80s, the threat was still there, but we had settled into a situation in which it was fairly apparent that outside of some horrible accident or tremendous miscommunication, it wasn't going to occur. I think what we're seeing now is a sort of reawakening among people who have never had to think about this before, about the potential for nuclear conflict. And it's going to be very disorienting, I think, and perhaps terrifying. And I think that the president would do well to, even if he is taunting in other aspects against his campaign opponents, we've all sort of grown used to that. This is an area where it's important that not only the president but his advisors and everyone in the country understand the grave consequences of the possibility of a nuclear exchange or even a non-nuclear war on the Korean Peninsula. And so I would urge the president to be much more circumspect in this particular arena above all else. I mean, I would urge him to be circumspect in all arenas, but this one is particularly sensitive.
That's an interesting point, that previous generations actually experienced nuclear war. The United States dropped nuclear bombs on Japan at the end of World War II to end World War II. So for previous generations, for a president like Truman or Eisenhower, it would probably not be something that they would joke about because they actually saw it happen. Are we too far removed from that? This is just something that we see maybe in movies and video games?
Well, I think the difference here is, again, what we were looking at with nuclear proliferation way back in the generation before us, there was the mutual assured destruction that kept the United States and Russia from deploying nuclear weapons. And they both realized that if one goes, the other goes, and we're all in trouble. And there were rational minds that understood the consequences of that. What you're dealing with in this guy in North Korea is not a rational mind. And I think that we've seen over the past 10, 20 years with North Korea, you give them an inch and they'll take another inch and another inch to the point where the guy really does pose a danger, not so much although it is to the United States, but look at the danger posed to that whole region, to Japan, South Korea, and other countries over there.
China.
And I think that, in Trump's mind, we needed to stop trying to appease the guy and to get tough with him, and this is what he has done.
But given what you just said, and I think you're right, I think it's a less rational mind before, although I think he does want to cling to power as much as he can. Would it not be advisable to ramp down the rhetoric as opposed to ramp it up? This is certainly ramping it up.
It absolutely is, but I think the president has seen that ramping down the rhetoric and trying to accommodate this regime and give them the benefit of the doubt hasn't worked. It's clear that they are still a tremendous threat to the region and to the world out there, that giving them the carrot hasn't worked, and maybe it's time to bring in the stick.
Well, let me say one thing about North Korea. They don't have a lot of carrots over North Korea. It is a bizarre and closed, almost psycho-fascist regime. But if we want to talk about rational minds engaging here, if this is a ploy, you can go back to Richard Nixon, sort of madman theory, right? He was sort of putting out there the notion that the president may be unhinged, maybe so off the rails that he may reach for the button. That was a ploy, and we can argue about whether and how it worked. But I think no one could argue that the president then, President Nixon, didn't understand the presidency, didn't understand the gravity of the game he was playing. I'm not here to psychoanalyze the leader of North Korea nor the president of the United States. I'm not satisfied personally that this president understands the gravity of what he's done in this regard and the consequences that it would unleash, because does North Korea pose a great threat to that region? Certainly. Does a vast hole where North Korea used to be, smoking with a nuclear fallout, does that pose a great? It absolutely does. I mean, I don't think there's a good option there. This certainly is not a good option.
Yeah, I think the president understands fully what he's doing. This is not leading from behind. This is projecting strength. This is saying if you do this, as you have threatened to do, you're going to come up the loser on this. And it's not an idle threat. I think everybody in the world understands that if North Korea pulls the trigger, Trump is absolutely right. The triggers that we have are a whole lot bigger, and they're going to come out the big losers on this. And I hope that even though we're dealing with an irrational mind, that the guy is at least rational enough to say, yeah, that's true. Maybe I better call South Korea and see if we can't tamp down these tensions.
Well, the fact that it's not an idle threat is actually what troubles me the most, I think. And we're sort of dancing around an issue, which brings up a point I do want to make. I said I wasn't here to psychoanalyze the president, but when we're talking about nuclear combat and tweeting about it in this way, there's a comportment, there's a fitness question that I think is legitimate to raise. And again, not to put too fine a point on it, I would invite anyone to go back on YouTube and look at Donald Trump's interviews from 1998 or 1989 and compare them with videos of him speaking today. And it strikes me that there is a tremendous difference between his acuity, his verbal abilities, his vocabulary, his ability to grasp and express himself in that period than now. I mean, one of the reasons why Trump was elected, and I know there are many, is that he had built up over 30 and 40 years a brand of what Trump is, right? And so in some ways what people were buying was a brand last year that, much like any other brand, may not always hold up over time. Its reality may not be the same as it was when you were building up the brand. And I think that there is a question of the president's fitness, frankly, and his capacity to be president, his capabilities as president. I know Chuck will probably disagree with that, and that's perfectly fine. But in my observations, that's a legitimate point to make, and it certainly comes up in the context of nuclear combat.
And other people have raised that question.
Yeah, but again, I go back. I think he does understand the gravity of the situation. I think he does know what he's doing. It's part of his negotiation style that he's excelled at for many, many years. If you don't take a firm position in the beginning, the opponent's just going to take advantage of your generosity. Remember when Barack Obama drew that red line in the sand about Syria using chemical weapons, and they crossed the red line and there was no consequence to that. So if there's not a belief that somebody really will follow through with their threat of retaliation, they're just going to continue to do what they've done. I would grant you that President Clinton, President Bush, and President Obama probably all had that presidential comportment that you were talking about, that the North Koreans took advantage of. Yeah, it didn't fix the problem. It didn't go away. It's only gotten worse. So, again, I don't know what the future's going to hold. I think it is dangerous, but I don't think that we should sit here and say that the president doesn't know what he's doing. I think he does know what he's doing on this. It's part of his negotiating style that he's used for many, many years.
Like Reagan at the end of his term said, look, I just wanted the Soviets to think that I was crazy enough to actually do it. And give them a moment of pause.
Oh, and that reminds me, because we're talking about the joking, everything else. No, Reagan didn't have Twitter, but he did say, "I've outlawed the Soviet Union. We start bombing in 5 minutes," or whatever it was. So
I remember that.
And that was not necessarily presidential comportment, but it's not the first time that this sort of thing has happened.
And that was done during a mic check, and it was considered wrong at the time for people to actually have released that, you know, when he was obviously not serious, not intending to communicate that,
Right.
as opposed to this, which the president clearly intends to communicate. So, excuse me, there's a President Trump has said that there is a deal to be had on DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that Obama had instituted. And it basically allows people who are brought here illegally as children to stay under certain circumstances, don't have a criminal record, and so forth. Do you think there is a deal to be had on that? And if so, if part of that deal is funding for the border wall, does that kill it?
Well, that would, you know, does it kill it? You know, I think that the wall has become important to certain sectors of the right as a symbol, not necessarily as a reality. In fact, the president and his administration have walked back the notion that it's an actual wall that you'll be able to walk up to and knock on and see the other side and all those things, that it's somehow, that it stands for this idea of greater border security. So some of that really depends on what the president's after in the end, and really what he's offering in exchange for that. And it's really too early for that. I mean, I think that the administration, having tasted something of a success in the legislative arena, in the tax reform debate, whether you agree with it or not, has made him hungry for more of that. That there's something positive for your legacy and for your presidency to have real, actual legislative achievements. In this arena, it would take a bipartisan effort, and it's just not clear to me what the terms are that the president would agree to, or what the president's political opponents would agree, or his constituency would agree to as well.
What do you think, Chuck? Is there a deal to be had?
I think that there is. I think the wall is non-negotiable. He is just, I mean, that was his whole campaign. You know, build the wall was a chant that went up in all the rallies.
He couldn't back away from that.
No, he can't back away from that. And I think a deal is made, though. If the wall, you know, this concrete structure, whatever it is, surveillance with drones, whatever that barrier is, if giving in on that means that something humane is done for these children who were brought to this country against their will, are allowed to stay in this country, I don't know how the vast majority of Democrats are going to be able to sacrifice that ability for those people who are living in this country, living by our laws, to be able to remain here safely and securely without fear of deportation. I don't know that the wall is something that you can, that's a hill to die for Democrats.
And like you say, it's not actually a physical 100% a wall on the border. I mean, part of the border is in the middle of the Rio Grande. We're not going to put a wall in the middle of the Rio Grande. But it seems like that is something that Trump has invested so much in, and his constituency certainly has invested a great deal in. This was what staked him out as the immigration reform candidate, as opposed to all the other Republicans in the field. Nobody could touch him once he said, we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it.
Yeah. You know, I think he's put a few too many chips on that, though, as well. I mean, you know, the chant was energizing for his base. The notion was exciting for those who agreed with it. But, you know, I think he got a bit ahead of himself in that, you know, I mean, figuring out exactly what it means has been difficult for the administration and for the president. And, you know, therefore, the investment of the base into it, it's not exactly clear what the base would settle for as opposed to an actual wall they could you know, see and feel and walk up to that would somehow, you know, solve some problem, I guess. I don't know what that would be. But the, you know, the notion that this is a symmetrical negotiation, I think, is off as well, because even as Chuck says, I think a lot of people, when they discuss the Dreamers, they agree that there's a humane aspect to permitting them to remain in this country. So there's sort of more of a consensus around that idea than there is around the idea that we need a border wall. And so it's not clear to me that the two are commensurate enough for there to be a deal, one for the other. And
clearly, Democrats have said, we want a clean DACA bill. Just DACA, nothing else. That's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. It can't happen. If the president's base is very much opposed to anything that even vaguely resembles amnesty for anybody, even the Dreamers. And the only way that that pill is going to be something that they can swallow is if they get the wall, because, as you said, the president has invested so much of his time, of his campaign, his administration already on the notion of the wall that you cannot give the Dreamers that type of what would be called amnesty without at least getting the wall. Everything else, E-Verify and all those other things, they're minor. The wall is the issue, and I think that you're going to have to find a way that both sides win on that, and I think they're going to.
Well, as we saw in Game of Thrones, the wall is nothing if you have a zombie dragon. So there's that.
Those are in the works.
Last question. This is a great one. It just happened this week. Senator Orrin Hatch, longest-serving senator in the Senate currently. The President Pro Tem has announced he's not going to run for re-election. Mitt Romney, former presidential candidate, former governor of Massachusetts, may in fact run for Senate from Utah. And the contentious relationship he's had with Trump is going to be interesting, and it may even set Romney up for running for president again in 2020. So my question is, if Romney gets elected to the Senate, which the White House clearly doesn't want, they were encouraging Hatch to stay and doing everything they can to keep him in the fold. If he gets elected, will he be an ally of President Trump's, or will he be an opponent of President Trump's?
I think you will find that he will be very much like Senators Ben Sasse, Jeff Flake, that on certain issues, on policy, he's going to be with the president, but I think he'll also be kind of like Flake and Sasse, where whenever they get an opportunity to take a shot at the president, they will. Ideally, for the president, Orrin Hatch would have stayed in the Senate, but he really didn't have much of a choice here. 5 years ago, when he ran for re-election, he made it perfectly clear, leave me alone, let me have one more term and I'm out, and it would have been very, very difficult for him to stick around. And Mitt Romney is probably the guy. I mean, Utah's going to pick their U.S. senator. I think that the president will find a way to work with him when he can, and they'll probably have a few Twitter fights over the course of the next few years as well.
They've had him already.
Well, he's already switched his. Mitt Romney has already edited his Twitter account to sort of set this up. I was actually very surprised that Senator Hatch announced that he wouldn't run again. Whatever my disagreements with him over the years, he never struck me as someone who would even allow himself to be seen as bowing to pressure, much less actually bowing to pressure, and coming on the heels of the editorials in Utah and elsewhere calling for his resignation or for him not to run again. I found that very, very surprising. But now that it's occurred, as far as potentially Senator Mitt Romney's relationship with the president going forward, sort of two things on that. Anyone who is expecting Mitt Romney to lead some sort of resistance against the administration, I think will be sorely disappointed. As Chuck says, I think there'll be a range of things in which Mitt Romney will distinguish himself from the president based on his own personal preferences. I mean, Mitt Romney's a fairly strong personality. He's been involved in politics a long time. He has no reason to be a shrinking violet. But as far as 2020 goes, I'll say this very clearly. Any incumbent president is a favorite for re-election. The advantages of incumbency are just tremendous. And so the notion that Mitt Romney or really anyone is going to mount a serious primary challenge to the president of the United States, a la Ted Kennedy in '80 or others previously, that's just not going to happen.
I mean, I have a hard time picturing Mitt Romney, had he been there, voting against, for example, the tax bill. He would have voted for the tax bill if he was there because it's a policy issue. So the only real distinguishing campaign he could do would be to be on issues of personal morality and personal behavior. Mitt Romney would be the anti-Trump in the sense that he wouldn't tweet things about his big nuclear button to North Korea, and he wouldn't have a retinue of women accusing him of sexual harassment. Perhaps one of the only guarantees we have in public life is that Mitt Romney would not have that happen to him. Yeah. So that would really be the only way he could distinguish himself to run.
And that is certainly not enough to base a primary run against a sitting U.S. president. That's not even in the ballpark.
And if he had done that previously, before Donald Trump was in the White House, that would have been one thing. But now, having run for president and lost, Mitt Romney and having run for president and won Donald Trump, I can only imagine the tweets that are going to come out on that about, you already ran, you had your shot and you lost. I ran, I won, and I don't know that Mitt Romney really wants to go into a battle and have to defend that loss that he had once before. If anything, perhaps he's still young enough that he could run after a second Trump term if Trump is reelected. But there's also a lot of other young bucks who want that seat, who ran last year, who will probably run again if the opportunity presents itself.
So there may be some sort of quixotic primary challenge to the president, but it would be merely that.
Well, there I thought I had my hopes set on that, but I guess I'm going to be dashed again.
Yes.
So. Anyway, that's Face Off for this week. Thank you very much to our guests, Chuck Muth of Citizen Outreach, Bradley Schrager, Wolf Ripken Shapiro, and there's a couple other names that I never can remember at the very
Schulman
end.
and Rabkin.
Yes, there we go. Thank you very much. Thanks both for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.